Forget everything you thought you knew about drug cartels, or at least everything you've been told. Beneath the bloody infamy of Pablo Escobar and his reckless Medellín Cartel, a far more sophisticated and lethal force was quietly building its own empire. Envision a criminal conglomerate so polished and corporate that it not only methodically dismantled the most influential drug lord in history, but also seized global dominion over the cocaine market, operating like an invisible hand. This is the narrative of the Cali Cartel, the gentlemen in Gucci loafers, whose strategy, intellect, and ruthlessness utterly redefined organized crime, forever changing the rules of engagement. In Colombia, during the dawn of large-scale cocaine smuggling, two colossal organizations held sway, the Medellín Cartel and the Cali Cartel. Everyone, save for the laziest observers, had heard of the former due to the very figure of its leader, Pablo Escobar. However, the latter can arguably be deemed even more successful. When comparing the two cartels, nearly all observers conclude that Cali operated as a corporation with a well-defined work mechanism, whereas Medellín resembled more of a reckless and impulsive gathering of dealers. Indeed, Medellín led the cocaine market for a considerable duration by virtue of being the first to occupy that niche. But Cali, slowly and systematically, capitalizing on Medellín's blunders, managed to destroy that rival cartel and then surpass it, extending its sphere of influence across virtually the entire world. Therefore, if you seek a deeper understanding of the most powerful Colombian drug trafficking enterprise, meet the Cali Cartel from the other side of the law. The pioneer of the cocaine trade in Cali was Benjamin Herrera Zuleta, nicknamed the Black Pope of Cocaine. He was a seasoned veteran of the drug world, convicted in 1974 for cocaine trafficking in Atlanta, Georgia, from where he soon managed to escape and settle in Cali. There, he established a distribution network for cocaine paste, which he imported into Colombia for processing and subsequent shipment to the United States. He was apprehended in Cali in June of 1975 with a massive cocaine haul for that era, but he secured his release the following March. Herrera initially frequented Antioquia and then hid for an extended period in the south of the continent, successfully evading extradition. Those who inherited Herrera's position in Cali were the Rodríguez Orejuela brothers, Gilberto, José, and Miguel Ángel, alongside their associate José Santacruz Londoño, known as the Student, all members of a gang called Los Chemas. They first drew the attention of law enforcement in the early 1970s. The initial history of the Cali Cartel and the biographies of its principal founders, Gilberto and Miguel Rodríguez and José Santacruz Londoño, remained shrouded in mystery. Accounts of their childhoods and family origins contradict each other and are filled with mutually exclusive details. The only certainty beyond doubt is that the Rodríguez brothers hailed from Mariquita in the department of Tolima and were raised in the impoverished Baltazar neighborhood of Cali. Gilberto was born in 1939 and Miguel in 1943. The elder brother apparently never completed high school, while Miguel claimed to have earned a law degree. Yet, numerous witnesses later confirmed, Miguel actually purchased his diploma by donating a library and showering the dean with gifts. In a 1991 article published in Time, Gilberto provided detailed accounts of his family and childhood. I was born between the cities of Mariquita and Honda, Tolima. My father was a painter and draftsman, and my mother was a housewife. We were 3 brothers and 3 sisters. At 15 years old, I started working as a clerk in a pharmacy in Cali. By 20, I was a manager, and at 25, 10 years after starting out, I resigned to launch my own pharmaceutical business. He was not lying about having worked in a pharmacy. From that establishment, he and his brother supplied legal medications, and a decade later, Gilberto did indeed open a chain of pharmacies called Drogas La Rebaja. Concurrently, from their earliest youth, they established themselves on the streets, earning the respect of other similar gangs throughout Cali's avenues. Santacruz Londoño had known the Rodríguez brothers since childhood. Born in 1943, he attended the same school as they did. In 1969, they joined Los Chemas, led by the experienced criminal Luis Fernando Tomaya Garcia. Los Chemas were implicated in at least several kidnappings of foreign nationals and wealthy businessmen. In these abductions, The Rodríguez brothers were relegated to the role of mere enforcers, while the student featured as one of the leaders. There were also reports that the names of the future Cali Cartel leaders appeared in criminal files, but none of these cases ever reached a courtroom, as judges received threats, and Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela, early in his career, even worked as a dynamiter under the alias El Chamizo. The brothers began their narcotics trade like most others with marijuana, but when cocaine appeared on the horizon, being much easier to transport, they switched over. Thus, by 1975, the Rodríguez Orejuela brothers were personally transporting small quantities of cocaine paste from Peru to their native valley. Using the profits from their kidnappings, they amassed funds to purchase a small airplane, which carried more paste, which they then refined in laboratories situated along the banks of the Nariño, Cauca, and Valle rivers. By that same 1975, they were already noted in official reports as drug traffickers. It is also known that in the mid-1970s, Hernández Gerardo Soto, a childhood friend of the Rodríguez brothers in Chepe, Santacruz, traveled to the United States from the Cali organization with the sole purpose of establishing solid sales contacts. Shortly thereafter, the well-known Medellín clan of the Ochoas did the same, whose patriarch, incidentally, grew up in the city of Cali and was personally acquainted with the cartel's founders. Each of the Cali Cartel founders possessed a distinct style that aided in the organization's development. Gilberto, short, corpulent, and with an innocuous appearance, became known as the chess player for his calculating and ruthless approach to drug trafficking. Initially, the chess player was meant to be the cartel's practical manager, but he ultimately became responsible for the organization's strategic planning. The handsome Miguel, the younger brother, was a micromanager who reveled in participating in the minute daily details of the cartel's operations, and he was apparently quite the vicious boss. The people who worked for the Cali Cartel saw Gilberto as a good uncle, recalled Rubén Prieta, a DEA agent. Everyone loved him. On the other hand, everyone was scared to death of Miguel. Jorge Salcedo, a key figure in this history, recalled days when it was best not to enter Miguel's office, and everyone was warned about his foul mood. José Santacruz Londoño was stocky, severe in appearance, and sparing with his emotions. His colleagues knew him as Chepe, and he was the most brutal of the three founders. Chepe became the ceaseless coordinator of the Cali Cartel's international cocaine transportation network. Later, Elmer Pacho Herrera joined the cartel. Santacruz and the Rodríguez brothers accepted his homosexuality. It was very strange, an agent from the Drug Enforcement Administration recalled. From the stories I heard, they tolerated Pacho. They would exchange snickers about his homosexual behavior, but Pacho went and did his job, and business is business. Herrera was born in 1951 and was the youngest of the Cali bosses. It was rumored he was the son of the Black Pope of Cocaine, Benjamin Herrera Zuleta, but Pacho never commented. Pacho received technical training and traveled to New York as a specialist, where, after accumulating money, he conducted semi-legal jewelry business for a time. But by the mid-1970s, he became entangled in cocaine trafficking and was arrested twice, in 1975 and 1978. Pacho Herrera returned to Cali in 1983 following a brief incarceration and struck a deal with the Cali founders regarding supply and distribution rights, which enabled him to reinforce and expand his New York base. He subsequently became a member of the cartel's board of directors and proved an invaluable collaborator, leveraging his contacts and knowledge to help Cali connect with partners through Juan Mata Ballesteros. Of all the Cali Cartel directors, less information exists about him. He never positioned himself as an upright businessman and rarely appeared in the press. Throughout the 1970s, the Cali Cartel strengthened and refined its network. They improved organization and logistics, beginning to utilize their family and criminal contacts, as well as the Colombian immigrant community in the United States, for their expansion. At this juncture, the differences in the chosen path between them and their Medellín rivals become noticeable. The Medellín Cartel, during the same period, employed unjustified violence to eliminate rivals and secure their niche in Miami and South Florida. Meanwhile, the Cali Cartel, quietly and without attracting undue attention, tended to its business, establishing a cocaine market in New York. Years passed before New York law enforcement uncovered the cartel's presence. For instance, just between March and October of 1978, the Cali Cartel trafficked cocaine valued at $26 million right under the agents' noses. In 3 years, Gerardo Soto, sent to represent the cartel in New York, had built a substantial cocaine distribution network that expanded at an astonishing pace until it was discovered by the Santacruz task force created to pursue this organization. Santacruz Londoño replaced Soto, and the work continued. During this time, Gilberto Rodríguez, alongside Jorge Luis Ochoa, owned banks in Panama where they channeled a significant portion of the profits earned in the United States. From there, the money moved to Panamanian branches of Colombian banks, and then approximately 30 companies laundered the funds until all the cocaine stains were removed. This period was not without its difficulties. In the late 1970s, the Japanese national Ishida Kawai, owner of eponymous jewelry stores in Colombia, was arrested in New York. Kawai was carrying a briefcase containing nearly $3 million in cash. Kawai was involved in money laundering for the cartel through his precious stones business and quickly began cooperating. The Japanese national apparently disclosed all the information he knew, and a few days later, a raid was conducted on a farm in Alabama, acquired by Rodríguez Orejuela, where a landing strip for small cocaine-carrying planes was discovered. Furthermore, based on Kawai's tip, agents inspected a wooden door factory that imported its lumber for production from Colombia. The importer was a company named Atlantic Lumber Company, which leased a warehouse in Baltimore, Maryland. Every supply board measured just over 3 meters in length and 10 centimeters in thickness. Inside, packages containing 225 kilograms of cocaine each were discovered. Atlantic Lumber was registered under the names of Jorge Suarez and Miguel Barbosa, who were revealed to be Santacruz Londoño and José Patiño, considered at the time the largest cocaine distributors in New York. The trail subsequently led to a Colombian suspect, Daniel Ocampo, who was placed under surveillance. Santacruz Londoño, already being tracked by the DEA, had returned to Cali in the interim, while Gilberto Rodríguez himself traveled to the United States to inspect the distribution network, remaining unaware of the surveillance on Ocampo. Miguel, conversely, stayed in the homeland and during this period engaged in extensive infiltration of the upper echelons of society. He possessed an invincible ally in journalist Alberto Giraldo, who was the foremost public relations specialist among representatives of private companies and high-ranking government officials. But Gilberto did not remain in the States for long. In January of 1980, Daniel Ocampo's telephone was tapped, and by the end of the month, it was revealed that he frequently called the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, connecting to a room registered to a certain Fernando Gutierrez. Ocampo was arrested at the close of January 1980 with $300,000 in cash. Documents found in his possession led authorities to conclude that his cocaine operations amounted to $2 million monthly, making him one of the Cali Cartel's foremost dealers. The documents also exposed 2 other Colombians involved in the organization, Luis Ibarguen and Manuel Vasquez. The very day Ocampo was apprehended, the mysterious Fernando Gutierrez departed the hotel, but he made a significant error. He registered his Florida address as residence number 1 on Grove Island. The building manager at Grove Island recognized José Santacruz from a photograph as a regular visitor of Fernando Gutierrez, and Gutierrez turned out to be none other than Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela. It was February of 1980, and at this precise moment, agents finally managed to identify all the Cali Cartel leaders by name and face. Gilberto Rodríguez realized he was in serious trouble and decided to relocate his operations to a quieter locale. He instructed his subordinate, Jaime Munero, to purchase a cattle ranch in Hope Hall, Alabama for $800,000. Munero constructed a landing strip there, but inadvertently exposed himself through a foolish act. He purchased 200 head of cattle with cash at a price significantly exceeding the herd's market value. Consequently, in September of 1981, authorities confiscated the ranch, accusing Munero of acquiring the property with drug trafficking proceeds. In this manner, the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, managed over 3 years, from 1978 through 1981, to seize $20 million in cash, 70 weapons, and over 200 kilograms of cocaine, valued at $50 million from the Cali Cartel. Law enforcement agents identified approximately 40 members of the organization, and prosecutors convicted many for cocaine trafficking, successfully identifying the leaders as well. 3 years later, it became clear that none of this had impacted the Cali Cartel's operations in any lasting way. Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela returned to his hometown, while José Chepe Santacruz remained the key figure in the United States, continuing his work to transform New York into the principal cocaine launchpad. Chepe's right-hand man, Cervantes, later provided detailed accounts of how cocaine was distributed in New York. In the early 1980s, it was transported from Miami to New York. Cervantes was required to be ready to receive a call from Santa Cruz at any moment. Most frequently, the merchandise was moved in luxury vehicles, concealed within expertly camouflaged secret compartments. Upon arrival at the destination, Cervantes would call a pager number provided by the boss and go to a hotel to await the courier who would retrieve the load. The courier would arrive, collect the car keys, and return an hour later with the empty vehicle. After returning to Miami, Cervantes would await the next phone call and instructions for a fresh trip to the Big Apple. From 1980 to 1983, Cervantes traveled to New York approximately 100 times, moving between 30 and 35 kilograms of cocaine on each journey. The market price at the time was around $30,000 per kilogram, meaning the volume of cocaine Cervantes transported during that period was estimated to be at least $90 million. Initially, Chepe stored the merchandise, cash, and weapons in hideouts within densely populated Latino neighborhoods, such as Washington Heights or the Lower East Side of Manhattan. However, these areas suffered from high crime rates, and local thugs frequently murdered his employees and stole cash and drugs. Therefore, as the organization expanded, Chepe began establishing caches in middle-class neighborhoods, first in Queens and Manhattan, and later in Westchester and Long Island, where the likelihood of being robbed was significantly lower. Then, even more so. Chepe acquired real estate companies that provided access to a multitude of properties in New York, particularly in the Queens area. One such firm, Michezo Realty, even supplied Chepe's organization with cell phones and forged documents. The real estate agents held permanent resident status and spoke flawless English. No one suspected they were involved in a criminal enterprise. They submitted rental applications, signed them, and paid bills under fictitious names. It occasionally happened that the Cali Cartel rented apartments to itself. The real estate firms were part of a vast support network of corrupt sources originating from commercial and governmental circles, which the Cali Cartel had meticulously cultivated in the Big Apple during the late 1970s and early 1980s. On their payroll, for example, were car dealerships that took cash without questions, as well as bureaucrats from the Department of Transportation who furnished passes and fake identification. All transactions were meticulously logged in accounting books. Based on analysis of Santa Cruz Group financial reports, police concluded that he was receiving approximately $4 million weekly. Superiors scrutinized every candidate before hiring them as street-level dealers. Obtaining a position within the cartel was not simple. One aspirant recounted his experience. First, he underwent a telephone interview with an organization representative in Cali via a public phone. Subsequently, a list of rules was faxed to him, a kind of corporate contract. Live modestly and avoid attracting attention were the two primary conditions. Even the individuals managing the caches were required to leave their homes in the morning and return in the evening, just like any typical employee. After the applicant reviewed the list, he was instructed to cut it into tiny pieces and dispose of it. Couriers and dealers were obligated to be reachable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A system of numbered public payphones was maintained for this purpose. The courier, upon arrival in New York with the load, would send the payphone number to Chepe's pager or he would be told where to go, and the boss would call back after a short while to discuss business. Chepe demanded that employees always carry $100 worth of 25-cent coins, so they would not encounter issues when calling from the booths. When Santacruz gave his men a phone number, they were to write another number on that piece of paper, ensuring that if any outsider tried to memorize the sequence, they would record the wrong digits. The Cali Cartel implemented this exact system for its other three major markets, Miami, Houston, and Los Angeles, establishing a rigid cell structure. The guiding philosophy of the emerging Cali Cartel was that the less a member knew, the safer the organization was. Each employee was assigned a code number, the registration of which was kept at headquarters in Cali. The cell leader would give the go-ahead to the dealer, who would then proceed to a public phone to obtain a list of customers and the meeting time with each one. He would then contact the buyers at specific locations, which rotated weekly. The dealer typically handed over 2 kilograms to each purchaser, but the buyer was not required to pay at the moment of acquisition. The cartel sold on consignment, meaning 2 to 3 kilograms were distributed to the buyer on credit, and they had a set period for payment. Deliveries were made on Saturdays and Sundays, as they believed most police officers were off duty those days. After settling for the merchandise, the dealer would go to the cash, where, using money-counting machines, he would reconcile the accounts and report the sum received to the cell leader via the payphone. One method used to export money back to Colombia involved smuggling automobiles, household goods, construction materials, and heavy machinery. Smuggling cash was far riskier than, say, purchasing a $250,000 car and shipping it to Colombia. Nevertheless, money was exported. The cartel used couriers to run cash from the States. The money was carried in square briefcases, similar to those used by pilots. In the late 1970s, the cartel pressured its couriers to fly on Braniff Airlines because they had contacts there. The cash smuggled in a single trip ranged from $100,000 to $300,000, depending on the size of the banknotes. However, by the early 1980s, the majority of the illicit funds were transferred from the United States to Panama, where Gilberto Rodríguez co-owned a bank. Naturally, for an illegal business with such revenues to function and for there to be funds for laundering, a force unit was also necessary. Thus, under Santacruz's command, there was a group of hitmen known as the Palestinians. These were Colombians who came from Medellín under the guidance of News Palestino. The Cali Cartel relocated them to the United States, and they were suspected of involvement in numerous murders across New York, Chicago, and Miami. The Palestinians were known for their brutality and elusiveness, distracting law enforcement from the cartel's primary activities for many years. In this way, by the early 1980s, the Cali Cartel had become a full participant and the second largest entity in the burgeoning drug market. They possessed a powerful organization, well-established logistics, and masterful conspiracy, which allowed them to lead the lifestyle they dreamed of, that of respectable gentlemen. The two cartels, Cali and Medellín, held drastically opposing views on criminal enterprise, but initially, between the late 1970s and the early 1980s, they coexisted peacefully. Cali and Medellín actively collaborated in coordinating supplies, investing in processing laboratories, and jointly bribing politicians. Essentially, at that time, they were friendly competitors. Each held its own market territory, and until the mid-1980s, there was room for everyone. During this period, the leaders of both the Cali and Medellín cartels enjoyed their escalating wealth, moving freely within society. For instance, both Pablo Escobar and the Rodríguez brothers participated in auto racing. Escobar and his partner owned a racing team, while the Rodríguez brothers owned 2 racetracks. All the leaders were also united by a shared love of football. The Rodríguez brothers purchased the América de Cali team and aimed for national victories. Moreover, unlike Pablo, they did not bury their assets, but put them into circulation, succeeding to such an extent that the city of Cali, under their influence, transformed into a prosperous and modern metropolis. They owned pharmacy chains, pharmaceutical and cosmetic production facilities, real estate, construction, agricultural, and distribution companies. In the 1980s, Cali's population surpassed 1 million inhabitants. Naturally, the city had countless telephones, every single one monitored by the cartel. Thanks to bribery, cartel technicians and engineers could tap any call. The cartel also employed thousands of taxi drivers. Gathered at the airport, they would report the arrival of any suspicious gringo. The Godfathers had divided Cali into fiefdoms. Gilberto and Miguel controlled downtown Cali, the area around the Intercontinental Hotel, and Ciudad Jardín in the southernmost part of Cali, where the wealthiest residents reside. Chepe controlled the southern region of Cali. Pacho's territories included Palmyra and Yumbo, north of Cali, and Jamundi, a town 50 miles south of Cali. Each maintained luxury properties in every neighborhood, shielded from prying eyes by high walls. Adjacent to their residences were swimming pools, tennis courts, bowling alleys, cockfighting arenas, stables, nightclubs, private beaches, and even soccer fields. To avoid scrutiny, they drove modest Mazdas, while the luxury cars they owned were leased out to politicians and notable figures. To control the local populace, the cartel corrupted key figures in politics, law enforcement, and business. Gilberto's bank extended stock packages to local leaders, some of whom joined the bank's board of directors, granting them access to preferential loans and overdrafts. By the mid-1980s, the Cali Cartel possessed wealth and power, but they also craved status. Consequently, they began working diligently to be accepted by Cali's influential figures as part of their elite. Chepe, for example, hosted lavish parties for Colombian government officials, providing food and services for 600 to 700 people. But, just as with Pablo Escobar, they initially found no success. Even here, however, the difference in approach is clearly observable. The Club Colombia, an exclusive social club for businessmen and industrialists, rejected Chepe's membership application. The enraged trafficker did not proceed to murder the snobs like his neighbor. Instead, he constructed an exact replica of the club on a hill in the prestigious Ciudad Jardín neighborhood and named it Casa Noventa. Chepe also built his country club Villa Brenda outside the city, to which only the powerful were admitted. In the media, the cartel leaders crafted an image of successful and respectable businessmen. If any negative information surfaced, Gilberto personally contacted the journalists. This growing influence could not help but attract the attention of local predators. In November of 1981, a meeting took place between the leaders of both cartels regarding the kidnapping of Marta Ochoa by the leftist guerrilla group M19, seeking a ransom of $15 million. Historians disagree on the location of this crucial meeting, Cali or Medellín, and how many traffickers were present, with numbers varying from 20 to 223. But, without question, the leaders at that assembly adopted a strategy that not only secured Marta Ochoa's release, but also allowed them to address the guerrilla threat. On a football pitch in Cali, leaflets were dropped announcing the formation of a new organization called Death to the Traitors, or MS in abbreviated Spanish. The message communicated that they would ensure every participant in the kidnapping would end up hanged from a tree. The guerrillas received the message and released Marta unharmed, although it remains unclear whether a ransom was paid. At the second MAS meeting, the cartels reached an agreement on how cocaine supplies would be regulated and coordinated to boost their profits, and which group would control which market. The Cali Cartel controlled New York, the Medellín Cartel controlled Miami and South Florida. California was declared a free zone, but eventually fell under Cali's control. Ochoa and Escobar dominated both MAS meetings, and it appears that at this stage, the Cali Cartel was willing to submit to Medellín's leadership. The relationship between Jorge Ochoa and Gilberto Rodríguez in the early 1980s is perfectly illustrated by the existence of these groups. Jorge Ochoa grew up in Cali and was a childhood friend of the elder Rodríguez. By the late 1970s, Jorge and Gilberto had become business partners, establishing a bank named First Inter-Americas Bank to launder their money. Interest on deposits by tacit agreement remained in Panama and ended up in the pockets of local General Noriega and his cronies. Furthermore, at that time, both the Medellín Group and Cali concluded their most significant strategic alliance with Mexico. The Cali Cartel's best friend, became Amado Carrillo Fuentes, nicknamed the Lord of the Skies. He earned this moniker because he was the first to utilize aging passenger planes to transport tons of cocaine from Colombia to Mexico. Amado assumed leadership of the Juarez cartel in 1985. Juarez was a crucial border point for trafficking moving through Mexico. Carrillo played a pivotal role as the link between the Mexican Narco Federation and the Cali Cartel. As one analyst told Time magazine, he possessed a genuine talent for forging alliances. In the 1990s, when Carrillo Fuentes was perhaps the most influential boss in Mexico, he established close working relations with Miguel Rodríguez, the most powerful Colombian boss. It is said they spoke on the phone almost daily to discuss business. Rodríguez paid Carrillo Fuentes a transit fee of 1 kilogram for every 2 kilograms of Colombian cocaine successfully delivered to the United States. Despite their good personal relations and mutual respect, the two bosses constantly argued over money, primarily because Amado frequently missed cocaine payments, sometimes a seizure, sometimes a boat sinking in a storm, sometimes something else entirely. On one occasion, Carrillo Fuentes even had to send 3 Mexican hostages to Miguel as payment assurance. The Mexicans were released only after Carrillo Fuentes overpaid Rodríguez Orejuela and gifted him an estate in Mexico as compensation. Toward the middle of the 1980s, the American cocaine market, due to the coordinated actions of the two cartels and the use of Mexican smuggling routes, began to become saturated. The price of cocaine in the States dropped by nearly 2/3, while in Europe, cocaine sold for 4 times as much. And in 1984, Gilberto Rodríguez and Jorge Ochoa traveled together to Spain to escape the pressure the Colombian government was exerting on the country's traffickers and, naturally, to examine the European cocaine market. And the European drug market was ripe for infiltration. When Gilberto Rodríguez and Jorge Ochoa moved to Spain in 1984, they purchased a large ranch in Badajoz near the Portuguese border, which served as an operational base from which they could assess the potential for cocaine trafficking in Europe. The Cali Cartel made contact with Galician tobacco smugglers in Spain, who were intimately familiar with the region's coastline and warehouses that could be used for drug smuggling. The cartel began using boats to pick up drugs from ocean-going vessels and bring them ashore. To launder their money, they established a network of accounts between Spanish and Panamanian banks and invested heavily in real estate. Jorge Ochoa dispatched one of his key lieutenants, Teodoro Castillon, to England, Germany, and Holland to establish contacts with the local Colombian communities and ascertain whether they could create infrastructure and distribution networks similar to those they maintained in the United States. However, Gilberto, Jorge, and their wives were arrested near Rodríguez's apartment in Madrid. The United States dispatched a lawyer to Madrid to request the extradition of Rodríguez and Ochoa, but the Spanish court instead extradited them to Colombia. In the 4 years following Rodríguez and Ochoa's arrival in Spain, the Cali Cartel achieved considerable success in the drug market, which had long been dominated by heroin. By 1990, cocaine seizures had increased dramatically from 900 kilograms in 1985 to 13 tons in 1990. 3 years later, the cartel had refined its European smuggling network so extensively that it utilized major European commercial ports, including Hamburg, Liverpool, Genoa, and Rotterdam. The Cali gentlemen had forged particularly warm relations with Italian organized crime. Cali supplied the cocaine, and the Italians managed the sales. They collaborated with everyone, both Sicilians and Neapolitans. The Camorra, possessing the most developed network for heroin distribution and the most welcoming and corrupt port in Naples, handled the wholesale trade of large quantities of Colombian merchandise across Europe. The Camorra's services for the Cali Cartel also included money laundering. On one occasion, Italian authorities discovered that the Camorra had laundered $40 million for the Cali Cartel by first depositing the funds into the account of someone's grandmother in Mantua, after which the grandmother transferred the funds to a shell company account in New York. From there, the money was transferred to another firm's account in Brazil and disappeared. Several arrests during cocaine sales also documented the promising links between the Cali Cartel and the Sicilians. For example, in 1989, the dismantling of 2 laboratories in Italy resulted in the seizure of 267 kilograms of cocaine base and cocaine hydrochloride. And in the same year, an FBI informant confessed to having organized the transport of over 500 kilograms of cocaine from Colombia to Sicily. By 1992, 2 significant events drastically increased the Cali Cartel's potential for expansion in Europe. The first was the collapse of communism following the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the dissolution of the Soviet Union on January 1, 1993. Second was the emergence of a borderless Europe after European trade barriers were lifted in 1992 in accordance with the provisions of the 1987 Single European Act. Immediately following the fall of the Berlin Wall, the first organizations to emerge between East and West were criminal syndicates. The Cali Cartel and major European criminal organizations began holding summit meetings in the early 1990s to determine how they could best collaborate to advance their interests. It took time for the collaboration to yield results, and in the first 3 months of 1993, approximately 2,300 kilograms of cocaine were seized, and the importance of Eastern European countries in Russia and global drug transit began to increase. Proof of their rising significance was the volume of cocaine seizures in the region. For example, on February 21, 1993, approximately 1,100 kilograms of cocaine were seized near St. Petersburg, and 7 individuals were arrested. In September and October of 1991, Czech and Polish authorities seized 2 loads of 100-kilogram cocaine shipments hidden in beer consignments. It seemed the level of international criminal cooperation knew no geographical bounds. European traffickers even traveled to Colombia for an exchange of expertise and to establish solid partnerships. There is data indicating that the Colombians also attempted to penetrate the Japanese market, but failed to reach an agreement with the Yakuza. At the beginning of 1993, nearly 10 years after Gilberto Rodríguez and Jorge Ochoa's trip to Spain, the Cali Cartel possessed a global reach that perhaps had no equal in the history of organized crime, and its potential for growth might have been infinite had a war of all against all not erupted in Colombia itself, initiated by the Medellín Cartel. The Medellín Cartel became the primary target of U.S. law enforcement efforts. Alexander Watson, the deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Bogotá from 1981 to 1984, stated that the mission considered Cali a relatively quiet city during that period. Drug trafficking was just beginning its rapid development, Watson recalled. Back then, if you were an American, you could travel from Bogotá to Cali at any time without fearing anything. The U.S. government maintained a favorable stance toward Cali's drug traffickers throughout the 1980s. Explaining why the government paid little attention to Cali, Crescencio Arcos, a diplomat and former Assistant Secretary of State in the 1980s, said, "We viewed Escobar's organization as the typical gold-chained gangsters who favored an ostentatious lifestyle. The Cali traffickers, however, were discreet, manipulative. We called them criminals in Gucci loafers." As early as 1981, the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, opened offices in both Cali and Medellín. Working as a DEA agent in Colombia carried risks. In 1976, for instance, an agent was fatally shot in Bogotá. The assassin simply walked into the office, went to the correct floor, and fired 3 rounds into the agent. These 2 offices operated very discreetly, with 2 agents each dedicated to intelligence gathering. The most crucial finding they established was that the traffickers were numerous and all collaborated with either Cali or Medellín, with the Medellín contingent being larger. The most well-known and conspicuous among the leaders was, naturally, Chepe Santacruz. Agents eventually compiled a reasonably clear portrait of him, and Colombian authorities granted permission to tap Chepe's telephone conversations with the United States. In 1983, Colombian authorities began intercepting Chepe's telephone conversations with the United States. Of course, the leaders were instantly aware, as they had taken precautions regarding this several years prior by corrupting employees at the telephone exchanges. One of Santa Cruz's lawyers visited the DEA office in Colombia and gave notice that he intended to secure an injunction prohibiting the police from tapping all telephones belonging to Santa Cruz. By this time, the Cali Cartel already had a team of talented lawyers on staff representing their interests in the legal arena. By the middle of the 1980s, the Cali Cartel's strategy had definitively crystallized to buy Colombia, not terrorize it. Spread money everywhere and everyone will accept you. Support a political candidate and you'll have them in your pocket. When drug money flooded Cali, the cartel spurred an economic boom. Agents investigating cartel cases commented, "The respectable citizens of Cali were willing to look the other way because the Godfathers earned their favor by distributing their wealth throughout the city. This later made our job significantly harder when we tried to dismantle the cartel." But a cartel remains a cartel, even if it wears Gucci footwear. Widely known is the fact of massive city cleanings of social elements like the homeless and prostitutes whose bodies were subsequently dumped into the Cauca River. By the mid-1980s, the Cali Cartel had corrupted all key strata of Colombian society. They felt untouchable, and they were. Authorities had no intention of pursuing them. They were far too busy pursuing the rampaging Medellín Cartel. The gentlemen could now focus on transforming their organization into a multinational criminal enterprise. Escobar, at the time, served as an alternate delegate to the Colombian Congress. A criminal with an ardent desire for acceptance by the Colombian social elite, Escobar presented himself as a sports promoter, industrialist, philanthropist, construction entrepreneur, and defender of natural resources. But he encountered the incorruptible Minister of Justice, Lara Bonilla, a staunch fighter for legality, determined to pursue the Medellín Cartel to the end. At the conclusion of their confrontation, Escobar's hitmen riddled him with machine gun fire on a crowded Bogotá street. The assassination of the Minister of Justice compelled President Belisario Betancur to declare a merciless war on all drug traffickers, and the Medellín Cartel Godfathers executed a public disappearance from public life. The Cali Godfathers did not approve of Lara Bonilla's murder, but they too were forced underground. It was then that Gilberto Rodríguez and his associate Jorge Ochoa departed for Spain, while Santa Cruz traveled to Mexico and dispatched some of his subordinates to the United States to scout potential locations for new cocaine refining laboratories. Subsequent to this, the occupation of the Colombian Palace of Justice occurred, during which M19 guerrillas took 250 people hostage, including the Chief Justice of the Colombian Supreme Court and many of the court's 24 judges. Over the next 24 hours, thousands of soldiers and police officers attempted to retake the building, but the well-armed and entrenched guerrillas defended themselves fiercely. When the government finally prevailed, 25 hostages lay dead, including the Chief Justice, and apparently all the guerrillas. It is widely believed that the Medellín Cartel paid the guerrillas to occupy the palace and burn extradition files containing compromising evidence against them in the judicial archives. The judges, many of whom favored maintaining the extradition treaty with the United States, were scheduled to vote on the matter soon. The shocking assault on the heart of the Colombian legal system set the tone for the rest of the decade. By 1990, over 200 judicial officials and at least 40 Colombian judges had been assassinated. President of Colombia Virgilio Barco, who took office in 1986, enforced the extradition treaty between Colombia and the U.S. In response, the Medellín Cartel initiated a merciless terrorist campaign against the state. The cartel swore, "Better a grave in Colombia than a prison in the United States," and began persecuting prominent supporters of extradition, as well as officials aggressively fighting the drug trade. A series of bloody murders ensued. When Gilberto Rodríguez and Jorge Ochoa traveled to Spain together, they trusted each other and collaborated to explore new markets. But relations gradually deteriorated as the two powerful organizations expanded their activities, and tension grew between them over their divergent paths of expansion. A key moment was the extradition of Ochoa and Rodríguez from Spain in 1986. Rodríguez was tried in Colombia in March of 1987 on cocaine smuggling charges, which could have led to his extradition to the United States. But this trial took place in a small town where the Cali Cartel controlled everything, including the judicial system, so Rodríguez was predictably acquitted. Jorge Ochoa returned to Colombia in July of 1986 and faced a more complicated legal situation than his childhood friend, forcing him into hiding. We discussed this in greater detail in the video about the Medellín Cartel. Ochoa evaded justice until November of 1986 when police stopped him at a checkpoint near Palmyra in the vicinity of Cali. He was en route to a summit convened by Escobar to finalize the details for creating a single super cartel which would be led by Escobar. According to an informant, Ochoa arrived in Cali in a white Porsche. When a police officer stopped Ochoa's car, the trafficker casually offered a bribe of $10, which the officer refused. The bribe offer gradually escalated up to $400,000, but without success. Ochoa was arrested and imprisoned in a maximum security facility in Bogotá. Meanwhile, the United States requested his extradition. Ochoa was released on December 30th, but seeds of distrust had been sown. The Medellín godfathers wondered, had their Cali friends provided information leading to Ochoa's arrest? And why had they not worked harder to get him out of prison sooner? Why had they permitted such a thing to happen on their turf? Meanwhile, at the super cartel meeting that Jorge Ochoa could not attend, Escobar presented his proposal. Under his leadership, the unified cartel would coordinate the political and economic strategy of all traffickers in Colombia. Furthermore, he would not only approve every shipment, but also receive 30% of the wholesale value of each one. 2 or 3 years earlier, a similar proposal made by the powerful and ruthless Pablo might have intimidated the Cali godfathers and forced them to accept such an extravagant deal. But that was then. Now, they were strong enough to categorically reject Escobar's demands, telling the Medellín boss they would not pay him anything. According to journalist Simon Strong, almost speechless with rage, Escobar merely muttered, "Then it's war," and immediately left the ranch. Additionally, other scenarios were proposed to explain why the deterioration of relations escalated into open warfare. One theory, popular in many sources, suggests the two organizations were fighting for dominance in the New York market. It is reported that Cali controlled the cocaine market in the mid-1970s, but as the market became saturated and prices started to drop in the mid-1980s, the more aggressive Medellín group, led by José Rodríguez Orejuela, began pushing its way into the lucrative New York market. Another version suggests the Colombian government might have tried to incite the enmity. A U.S. embassy report in Bogotá in August stated that General Jaime Ruiz Barrera, commander of the Medellín Army Brigade, and the mayor of Medellín are strongly pushing this line, perhaps to set the cartels against each other. The mutual hatred between Pablo Escobar and Pacho Herrera, stemming from a dispute over one of Escobar's New York distributors, is another plausible explanation for why the cartels turned on each other. While imprisoned in the early 1980s, Herrera befriended a Colombian named Piña, an employee of Jaime Pabón, who was a major cocaine distributor for Escobar. But Piña enraged Pabón when he behaved scandalously with a member of his family, forcing him to flee and seek support from Herrera's organization. Initially, Pacho Herrera refused to hire Piña because he knew Pabón was a close associate of the powerful and cruel Escobar, and he did not wish to initiate a conflict. However, Pabón did not relent and personally sought assistance from Escobar. Pablo believed a phone call to Chepe Santacruz would be enough to compel Herrera to surrender Piña. The Rodríguez brothers, Pacho Herrera and Santacruz, convened. They were aware of the consequences of disobeying Pablo, but they decided that maintaining a united front would be the best response to his threats. "We have no quarrel with Piña," was their reply to Escobar. Escobar, furious, called Pacho and demanded Piña's surrender within 24 hours, or he would execute Herrera's entire family. Instead of being frightened, Herrera perceived Escobar's demand as an insult to his honor. In the merciless world of drug trafficking, there are moments when honor supersedes business. Pacho called his brother Ramon, who ran his cell in New York, and ordered him to hire Piña immediately. Shortly before dawn on January 13, 1988, a massive bomb detonated near Monaco, Escobar's luxurious 8-story condominium in the upscale El Poblado neighborhood of Medellín. The trafficker was not home, but his wife Victoria, their children Juan Pablo and Manuela, were asleep in the penthouse. The explosion killed 2 night guards, created a 13-foot crater in the street, and blew out windows in neighboring buildings. Incredibly, the Escobar family remained unharmed, though the blast partially deafened his daughter Manuela. The attempted assassination shocked Escobar. No one had ever dared to challenge his authority before. All he had to do was threaten and intimidate, and it had always worked. Initially, he suspected the DEA was responsible, but he later concluded that it was his emerging Cali rivals attempting to seize control of his distribution networks. Escobar dispatched hitmen to Cali to locate and kill his enemies. Believing the best defense was a good offense, the Cali Godfathers sent their own assault teams to Medellín. Thus, the war commenced. By mid-August, Colombian military intelligence reported that following the explosion at Monaco, 60 members of the Cali Cartel and 18 members of the Medellín Cartel had been killed. Both sides realized the war was detrimental to drug trafficking and attempted to negotiate a truce, but the accumulated animosity was too great. Instead of seeking peace, the two organizations became increasingly violent. A 200-pound bomb placed in a Renault exploded near the Ribaja shopping center in Cali, resulting in 7 deaths, 24 injuries, the destruction of a supermarket, and damage to 20 other commercial establishments and 7 homes. Then, the war spread to the United States, and in the last week of August, the media reported several dozen explosions in New York and Miami. According to the New York Times, law enforcement officials claimed there was evidence that the two cartels had begun informing the police about each other's deliveries, and that, following anonymous tips, the police had made several significant seizures throughout the year. According to some sources, the Cali Cartel also sent more than 10 professional hitmen from Colombia to the United States. Both cartels went further, hiring foreign mercenaries. Yair Klein, a retired colonel from the Israeli Defense Forces and an associate of Carlos Lader, helped organize the supply of 100 Uzi submachine guns, 460 Galil automatic rifles, and 200,000 rounds of ammunition to Rodríguez Orejuela, training some of his men. Meanwhile, the Cali Cartel, in August of 1988, contracted a team of 11 British mercenaries to plan an operation to assassinate Escobar. The mercenaries trained for 3 months preparing for the assault on Escobar's ranch, Hacienda Nápoles, but the operation ended in fiasco when the helicopter carrying the assault team crashed into a mountain, aborting the mission. As the war dragged on, Escobar grew increasingly irritated by the posture of the Colombian security forces. Escobar believed Gilberto Rodríguez had struck a deal with the DEA. From Escobar's perspective, the Colombian government seemed interested only in destroying his cartel, not Cali's, and he suspected state security forces were colluding with his arch-enemies, and as it later turned out, he was correct. "We considered Escobar and the Medellín Cartel to be the lesser of 2 evils," explained Cesar Gaviria Trujillo, president of Colombia from 1988 to 1992. That is why the Colombian government focused all its attention and resources against the Medellín Cartel. When Escobar became enraged, obtaining irrefutable documentary proof of the authorities' collaboration with Cali, Colombia trembled. A series of bombings, the assassination of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán, the explosion of an airplane over Bogotá, the state launched an all-out war against the Medellín Cartel, for which any means were acceptable, including close cooperation with Escobar's rivals, the despised Cali Cartel. From mid-August to mid-December of 1989, the government arrested 497 individuals, confiscated drugs and property valued at $250 million, and extradited 9 suspects to the United States. During the same period, Escobar retaliated, killing 187 officials and civilians, carrying out 205 bombings, and causing $501 million in damages. The Cali Cartel not only actively participated in the war, but also directed its course. Their intelligence and espionage information, the pursuit of which never ceased day or night, proved more effective than the gang's massacres and terrorist attacks. At the beginning of 1989, the cartel leadership tasked Jorge Enrique Velázquez, nicknamed El Navegante, with infiltrating the organization of José Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha. Velázquez performed so well that Rodríguez Gacha entrusted him with his complete security. The Cali Cartel paid Velázquez $1 million to capture the Mexican, Agent Peña recounted. Velázquez led the police directly to Rodríguez Gacha. On December 15, 1989, security forces killed Gacha, his son Freddy, and several bodyguards in a firefight, which undoubtedly severely compromised the organizational integrity of the Medellín Cartel and dealt a heavy blow to Pablo Escobar. In March of 1990, bombs exploded simultaneously in Cali, Bogotá, and Medellín, resulting in 26 deaths and 200 injuries. Escobar increased the bounty he paid for the killing of a police officer to $4,000, plus an $8,000 bonus for killing any security force member. Over 3 months, 108 police officers were killed. By 1990, President Barco had spent 4 years attempting to topple Escobar, but the trafficker remained free, and terrorist drug trafficking continued to be a way of life in the country. In May of that year, Cesar Gaviria Trujillo won the presidential election. His campaign was based on a rigid platform that offered no concessions to the narcos. However, once in power, Gaviria drastically shifted the situation and began pursuing a policy of compromise, not confrontation. On August 7th, Gaviria made a generous offer to the traffickers. Surrender voluntarily, and you will receive light sentences and immunity from extradition. Escobar perceived the weakness and increased pressure on the government to extract new concessions from Gaviria. In September, he kidnapped the journalist Francisco Santos, a member of the family that owned a major newspaper in the country, El Tiempo, and Mariana Montoya, sister of Germán Montoya, a former presidential secretary. Escobar reached the keen conclusion that the best way to change government policy was to make the country's elite the primary target of his terrorist campaign. On September 25th, Escobar resumed his two-front war, not forgetting his main enemies, and his men launched an attack against a property near Cali, believed to belong to the Rodríguez brothers. 18 people were killed and several others injured. The wave of kidnappings and murders continued until the end of October. The Cali Cartel, during this period, regularly sent assassins to Medellín with varying degrees of success. On one occasion, 12 men were abducted from their hotel rooms in Medellín. 4 of them were found dead, and the remaining 8 vanished. On the bodies of 2 of the victims, tags were found inscribed, "For being from the Cali Cartel." War is war. Authorities anticipated that the cartel war would become even more horrific, and such episodes multiplied. A few weeks after the kidnapping of Francisco Santos and Marina Montoya, Gaviria issued a decree granting further concessions to the traffickers. Now, all a trafficker needed to do upon surrender was confess to a single crime, and he could avoid extradition if new charges were brought against him after surrender. And in December, President Gaviria issued another decree, this time offering traffickers full judicial benefits if they confessed to one crime. The Ochoa brothers, leaders of Medellín, were the ones who ultimately accepted the government's offer. The deal was too advantageous to refuse. Serve a few years in prison without the possibility of extradition to the United States, and then be released to spend their entire fortunes. Following the death of Rodríguez Gacha and Ochoa's imprisonment, Escobar was left alone in his two-front war. He feared extradition if he surrendered. Nothing guaranteed he would receive the same concessions as Ochoa. Ultimately, he did not cease killing and kidnapping after Gaviria issued his decrees. He continued the fight against the state with the only tool available to him: terrorist drug trafficking. In January, Marina Montoya's body, bearing 6 bullet wounds to the head, was discovered in Bogotá. During a raid near Medellín, police accidentally killed another of Escobar's kidnapped victims, Diana Turbay, a descendant of another prominent Colombian family and the daughter of a former presidential candidate. Gaviria sensed that Colombians were weary of living under the siege of terrorist drug trafficking, and he continued to pursue the policy of capitulation he had offered the traffickers. He issued a new decree guaranteeing immunity from extradition for all crimes, not just those following the first decree. Meanwhile, in early 1991, as part of the efforts to reform the country's constitution, the extradition policy was debated, considering the possibility of banning it entirely. Since 1984, the extradition treaty had caused heated arguments, and while the Medellín group often relied on intimidation, Cali operated in its gentleman's style. The Cali Cartel paid many members of parliament, and its lawyers constantly circulated during the extradition debates, recounted one deputy. Escobar announced he would surrender in exchange for President Gaviria's promise that he would be treated leniently and not extradited to the United States, where he faced charges for at least 10 drug trafficking and murder offenses. The trafficker now had everything he wanted. It was time to surrender and join the Ochoas in prison. On June 19, 1991, the most wanted man in Colombia, and perhaps the entire world, was picked up from an undisclosed location and flown to his hometown of Envigado, where he was incarcerated in a luxurious prison called La Catedral, built specifically for him. While Escobar waged war on the state, the Cali Cartel continued to accumulate power, wealth, and influence, solidifying its base in the United States and expanding into Europe and Latin America. By 1990, U.S. officials, who months earlier had claimed the Medellín Cartel was responsible for the majority of U.S. cocaine smuggling, now discovered that the Cali Syndicate had captured the lion's share of the trade. By the end of 1990, Cali's share of the U.S. market had jumped to approximately 75%, plus 95% of European distribution. But the larger an organization grows, the more visible it becomes. On July 1, 1991, Gilberto Rodríguez gave an interview to Time magazine in which he portrayed himself as an honest businessman and an innocent target of the psychopathic Escobar. He denied any involvement in drug trafficking. He attributed the conflict to Escobar's tendency to view anyone who did not support him as an enemy. It all began when Mr. Escobar called me and asked me to help him commit violent acts to obtain the annulment of the 1979 extradition treaty from the Colombian government. Mr. Escobar believes one must take justice into their own hands. I do not agree. He thinks a criminal can win a war against the state. I think that is absurd. The crimes he committed in Colombia under the pretext of drug trafficking were a very big mistake, Gilberto Rodríguez told Time magazine. The Cali Cartel, Rodríguez claimed, was an invention of General Jaime Ruiz, who unsuccessfully pursued Escobar and his partners. He, Rodríguez asserted, failed to make history with the Medellín Cartel, so he invented a war over the New York markets and inserted me, an honest businessman. He also noted that he remained concerned for his safety because, like all Colombians, he understood that Pablo would hardly remain in prison and repay his debt to society. And Gilberto, naturally, did not speak of the most important thing. The Cali Cartel also had no intention of stopping. At that time, many of Pablo's former allies began turning to Cali for assistance, including the Castaño brothers, his trusted men. This was due to Pablo's increasing paranoia. He had begun eliminating everyone he considered a traitor. In the following months, mutilated bodies began appearing around La Catedral, including some of Escobar's most trusted collaborators. It was rumored that the victims were kidnapped and brought to the prison where, under Escobar's supervision, they were tortured and killed. In July of 1993, Escobar escaped, despite the prison being surrounded by 500 soldiers. He first fled to the La Romelia ranch and waited in hiding until the initial search patrols left the area and the clamor surrounding his escape subsided. Escobar then relocated to Llano Grande near Rio Negro, placing the state in an embarrassing situation once again. Gaviria knew he had to recapture the trafficker, or he would have to forget a place of honor in Colombian history. This time, things were much harder for Escobar. Not only was he at war with the state, but everyone, including his former allies, had turned against him. And he also had to worry about the Cali godfathers, because he knew they could not sleep soundly until their arch-enemy was eliminated from the stage. On January 30th, 1993, a bomb detonated in downtown Bogotá, killing 20 people. Society number 1 left a message for the nation, but then a surprise occurred. The following day, 2 bombs, one containing approximately 100 kilograms of dynamite and the other 80 kilograms, exploded in Medellín in front of the apartment buildings where Escobar's wife, 2 children, sister, and mother-in-law lived. Simultaneously, 5 armed men appeared at Escobar's unoccupied country house, located 45 kilometers from Medellín, and ordered the sole caretaker to leave before they detonated the structure. In a news rotation published on February 2nd, responsibility for the terrorist attacks was unexpectedly claimed by a new group, Los Pepes. The Pepes desired the complete destruction of Pablo Escobar, his followers, and his assets, to give him a taste of the same medicine he unjustly distributes to so many. Los Pepes, which stands for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar, essentially began a war against Escobar using his own rules, and it can be argued that Pablo himself created them. When he was at La Catedral, business was managed by 2 of his trusted men, Fernando Galeano and Kiko Moncada, 2 individuals completely devoted to the Medellín Cartel who had proven it multiple times. Pablo, in a fit of paranoia, summoned them, tortured them extensively, and killed them. Moncada's wife, desiring vengeance, began seeking options, and the most obvious was to join the arch-enemies. But she was not the only one dissatisfied with the former El Patron's actions. The murder of his closest collaborators and loyal traffickers prompted others to worry for their own lives. As soon as Escobar killed Galeano and Moncada, their men felt in danger, ran to the Cali Cartel and said, "We want to switch sides," explained Joe Toft, then the DEA chief in Bogotá. The Cali leaders responded, "Well, if you want to switch sides, you will have to pay us." A great deal of money then flowed from Medellín to Cali. Initially, however, the Cali gentlemen refused to participate in such a dubious venture as collaborating with Los Pepes, but they changed their minds when they understood the advantage this move would bring. Moreover, former Escobar men were also among Los Pepes, and DEA agents secretly collaborated with them. There was even talk of CIA involvement, which meant that Los Pepes were, in fact, a unit of Escobar's former supporters who had started fighting against him under the impetus of the Cali Cartel. The core of the Pepes comprised the Cali leaders, who provided the funding, as well as Escobar's former associates, the Castaño brothers, Carlos and Fidel, and Don Berna. The Castaños are depicted in the series Narcos as 2 psychopathic country assassins, but the series omitted the fact that both these psychopaths were longtime members of the Medellín Cartel and led a death squad called Los Tangueros. Don Berna, perhaps the most important figure in the Los Pepes story, deserves a more detailed account. He began his career in the Medellín Cartel as a simple enforcer, rising through the ranks due to hard work to become the head of security for Fernando Galeano, the same man killed by Escobar. Following his death, Berna saw an opportunity not only to avenge his boss, but also to advance his career. It was he who negotiated with the Cali Cartel for funding and who acted as the intermediary between the politicians of Los Pepes, represented by the Castaños, and the Cali leaders. Don Berna's bureaucratic links were truly astonishing. As Agent Chris Feistel related years later, Berna was one of the main conduits between the Pepes and the DEA for the provision of information. The police were represented by the search unit formed in 1989, a true elite of the Colombian security forces, which by default had direct contact with the president. The unit was commanded by 25 officers, one of whom was intelligence officer Danilo Gonzalez. It was he who was tasked with collaborating with Don Berna, and they eventually became friends. Although Gonzalez had already been noted for his association with suspicious elements, among his acquaintances were 2 corrupt Cali police officers who, after the fall of the Cali Cartel in 1995, would join the North Valley Cartel, the largest organization for the next 10 years. Danilo Gonzalez himself would form a group called the Devil's Cartel. Don Berna, after Cali's downfall, would become the most prominent criminal boss in Colombia until 2005, thanks to the connections developed during his work with Los Pepes. The Pepes proved to be the organizationally ideal criminal structure, where a literal mix of corrupt authority, law enforcement, and organized crime fused, acting in concert and flourishing until 2005. Therefore, it is improbable that representatives of the elite approached the Cali Cartel directly for assistance as depicted in the series Narcos. All interests converged on a single point: Los Pepes, managed by Don Berna and the Castaño brothers. In Los Pepes, the DEA, the Search Unit Police, the CIA, political elites, and the Cali Cartel were tightly interwoven, united by a single objective: stopping Escobar at all costs. Escobar immediately responded in fury. On the morning of February 15th, two powerful bombs exploded 5 minutes and 12 blocks apart in downtown Bogotá, killing 4 people and injuring over 100. These were the 5th and 6th car bombs since Escobar had declared war on the state in mid-January. But a few hours later, in Medellín, unknown assailants in a blue Toyota camper truck set fire to a luxurious home belonging to Escobar in the exclusive El Poblado neighborhood. It was Los Pepes again, demonstrating they were serious, an eye for every act of terrorism committed by Escobar. 2 days later, militants killed Carlos Maria Osa, a major financier for Escobar who helped pay for Pablo's terrorist campaign. That same day, Carlos Alzate, a trusted man of Escobar who could not reach Pablo without Osa, surrendered. The Pepes had seriously begun to weaken Escobar's organization. The Cali Cartel utilized the most modern computer systems and the best specialists, who acted preemptively, mapping out Escobar's infrastructure. Furthermore, they were not bound by laws but enjoyed tacit clearance from the state and the DEA, which significantly expedited the process. However, on March 5th, the Pepes announced a ceasefire, offering no explanation, although the press speculated this was done to give Escobar time to surrender. This did not happen, and exactly 1 month later, they released another statement declaring their commitment to Escobar's complete destruction. In other words, the Pepes were saying, "We will get you, Pablo, no matter what you do." By mid-November, they had killed 50 of Escobar's men, including his brother-in-law, and destroyed approximately 20 properties belonging to his relatives and associates. The executioners failed to capture the big fish, but they were slowly poisoning the sea in which he swam. They also embarrassed the Colombian government. Why did the Gaviria administration not take control of the situation, Colombians wondered? Or are the Pepes and the government working together? During the period when the Pepes began their campaign against Escobar, U.S. and Colombian officials naturally denied publicly that the Cali Cartel had provided them with information aiding the hunt for Escobar. Today, these officials willingly admit that the people from Cali played a key role in eliminating Escobar nonetheless. The Colombian government was locked in a life-or-death struggle with Pablo, and it did not care where the information originated as long as it was reliable. Colombia's nightmare ended on December 2, 1993, when Escobar was killed on a Medellín rooftop. When radio stations in Cali broadcast the news of Escobar's death, residents celebrated the event, forming car cavalcades that honked horns and waved white flags in front of the Rodríguez-owned pharmacies. Miguel, having learned of Escobar's death from a high-level spy, immediately called Gilberto, and during the conversation, the elder brother wept. He then embraced his terrified accountant, Guillermo Palamari. An unusual gesture from the persistent and pragmatic godfather frightened the accountant and revealed the tension the Cali gentlemen felt in their war with Escobar. The Cali godfathers felt relief that their arch-enemy was finally buried, but now they were the new cocaine kings, and the government immediately declared it would also pursue Cali. However, it must be noted that despite the hunt for Escobar, authorities had still sought to penetrate Cali's infrastructure throughout these years. They conducted a series of raids on drug production laboratories, official residences, and offices belonging to the Godfathers, destroying nearly 20 tons of refined cocaine and 100 laboratories. In January of 1992, Colombian security forces launched an operation targeting the cartel's money laundering schemes, simultaneously executing 32 raids not only in Cali but also in Bogotá and Barranquilla. They seized numerous computers, floppy disks, and 20,000 other financial records, uncovering information that led to 3 arrests and the freezing of $15 million in bank accounts across Colombia, the United Kingdom, Germany, Hong Kong, and the United States. By the end of December 1993, 120 U.S. Army engineers arrived in Colombia to execute a 10-week construction project in the village of Huanchaco, located in the jungle about 75 miles from Cali. Officials from both countries insisted the troops were there exclusively to build schools and roads, but many Cali residents believed the project's true aim was the construction of a large base for intelligence gathering and organizing raids against the cartel's infrastructure. Meanwhile, the cartel was studying its options for action in the post-Escobar era. Its leaders held a major meeting to discuss their future and how they might increase drug business in the United States and expand internationally. The cartel had grand dreams and large plans, but their own nightmare had already begun to materialize. Once Escobar was finally neutralized, the destruction of Cali became the primary focus of U.S. law enforcement efforts. A major turning point in this case occurred on May 18, 1994, when Colombian authorities seized a $1 million IBM AS/400 computer from a high-level collaborator of the Rodríguez brothers. To this day, this supercomputer represents the most sophisticated technology ever taken from drug traffickers. It took the DEA several months before its computer experts managed to decipher it. What the DEA uncovered was staggering. Computer files containing information on thousands of bribes the cartel had paid to Colombians from all walks of life. By 1995, the Colombian government had dispatched 500 soldiers and police officers to a unit known as the Search Block, tasked with tracking down and destroying the Rodríguez brothers and their principal subordinates. Authorities conducted a series of raids and scattered hundreds of leaflets across Cali, announcing a reward of $1.6 million for information leading to the capture of Gilberto and Miguel. But nothing materialized. The search block would appear at homes, apartments, or business, only to discover that one of the brothers had just slipped away. Corruption was still rampant, and the government was forced to dismiss 174 police officers, including 48 captains and other high-ranking officials linked to the Cali Cartel. But Colombian authorities, with support from U.S. authorities, persistently continued their investigations. Most of the cartel operatives were deathly afraid to testify against the powerful bosses, but eventually a couple of their accomplices did so, and this proved to be another turning point for the authorities. The first to step forward was Harold Ackerman, who was such an important cell leader that he was nicknamed the cartel's ambassador to the United States. He was an exemplary manager from Cali and an employee who helped make the cartel the most powerful and successful criminal corporation in the world. Ackerman owned a clothing store in Miami. "I was living well, but one day Colombians started coming into my store," Ackerman recalled. "They told me I could make much more money with the Cali Cartel." According to Ackerman's estimates, in 2 years of working until 1991, he had earned $3 million. In April of 1993, he was arrested, and through one of his lawyers, Miguel Rodríguez, sent him a message. "Don't worry, Harold, don't take it personally. Your family will receive a monthly payment." The second part of the message stated, "Mr. Rodríguez reminds you that as a friend he is a very good person, but as an enemy he will be very bad. Think about the deal, or not even your dog will remain. Remember, you still have family in Colombia." Despite this, Ackerman accepted the deal. He became one of the most significant witnesses ever to testify against the Cali Cartel, and his testimony helped make Operation Keystone one of the most pivotal criminal investigations in American history. Ackerman explained in detail the organization's hierarchy, structure, working methods, and the routes for cocaine import and distribution in the United States. Following this information, a series of investigations and operations were launched against the Cali Cartel. Miguel Rodríguez took the news of Ackerman's betrayal poorly. All their plans to conquer the world market crumbled. They now needed vast amounts of money to keep their gigantic transnational criminal organization afloat, but Ackerman's arrest and that of other accomplices were draining the cash flow and disrupting distribution. The second major Cali Cartel associate to turn to the United States for help was Guillermo Palomari, the cartel's chief accountant. By the summer of 1995, Palomari had become a man who knew too much, having participated in most of the cartel's major meetings and tracked hundreds of documents. In April of 1995, the Colombian government charged him as a straw man for the criminal enterprise and summoned him for questioning. Miguel Rodríguez believed Palomari would talk and knew time was running out. If the police captured Palomari, he would become a terrible witness against him. Miguel contracted for the assassination of his former accountant, but Palomari managed to hide in Cali. Palomari realized his only chance to survive was to surrender, so he called the U.S. Embassy in Bogotá to negotiate. In August, Palomari arrived at the U.S. Embassy in Bogotá and met with the DEA to arrange the details of his surrender and cooperation. In exchange for his testimony, Palomari joined the Witness Protection Program. Palomari's wife was supposed to meet him the day he left for Bogotá, but she never showed up at the designated location. She had vanished. During the same period, Colombian politics were in upheaval. Attorney General Gustavo de Greiff promoted a policy of legalization and the idea of integrating the Cali Cartel's drug trafficking into a peaceful channel. In Colombia, the Attorney General's office is a branch of the judicial power and completely independent of the president. In short, the president of Colombia does not control the country's chief prosecutor, and then President Gaviria was very displeased with the prosecutor's actions but could do nothing. But more than Gaviria, the United States was unhappy, as the soft policy toward Cali did not sit well with them at all. But de Greiff continued on his course to resolve the issue. He wanted to convince the leaders to surrender, believing this would be the best way to reduce or eliminate the mass corruption and widespread violence associated with the cartels. He therefore devised a plan for submission to justice, which, he hoped, would encourage the godfathers to abandon the criminal path. The plan included the following terms. When the Attorney General's office obtained evidence, the trafficker would be offered a sentence reduction. A trafficker against whom the office had evidence, but not enough to secure a conviction, would receive half the maximum sentence and, naturally, no extradition. U.S. government officials had cause to suspect there was more to de Greiff's dealings with the Cali Cartel than met the eye. De Greiff's name appeared alongside Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela's in documents related to an airline company, indicating they were both co-owners. The Attorney General denied ever meeting Gilberto or Miguel Rodríguez, but during the investigation, accountant Palomari testified that de Greiff had met with the brothers twice in 1993 to discuss a surrender agreement and perhaps even the Los Pepes issues. The situation dragged on. The bosses remained untouchable to the United States, and on top of that, the possibility of legalization loomed on the horizon. On the eve of elections in Cali, they were sponsoring the candidate Ernesto Samper, who had long-standing ties to the traffickers. At least in 1981, he had met with all the Medellín members at the Intercontinental Hotel, and Gilberto Rodríguez's agenda, seized in Spain, contained Samper's personal number. Everything should have worked out for the best had the Narco cassette scandal not erupted. On June 15, 1994, during the Colombian presidential election, presidential candidate Andrés Pastrana was campaigning in Cali. An unknown man handed him several tapes containing unusual conversations, obtained through wiretaps. The recordings provided Pastrana with irrefutable evidence that the Cali Cartel had financed his opponent Ernesto Samper's campaign with over $6 million. The tapes, however, had no impact on the election's outcome, and Ernesto Samper won anyway. Nevertheless, he had to prove that this had not occurred due to funding from the Cali Cartel. A paradoxical situation arose. The president, allegedly compromised by drugs, became a reliable and predictable ally for Washington in the war on drugs. The man on whom the Cali leaders had staked their hopes became their most ardent enemy. As the prime suspect in shady dealings with traffickers, Samper could not defy the Clinton administration when the Americans began pressuring him to pursue the drug lords, and the constant pressure and raids began to affect the cartel's communication network and its money flow. With rewards of $1.9 million offered for Miguel and Gilberto Rodríguez and $625,000 for Santacruz and Herrera, the Godfathers constantly had to worry about informants and betrayal. The Cali Cartel, seemingly gentler and milder, intended to take no chances. In 6 weeks, approximately 75 corpses were discovered in the city, some bearing signs of torture. Gilberto was tracked first, via his assistant nicknamed Flaca. Informants reported that if they found Flaca, the boss would eventually appear too. On June 9, 1995, Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela was located in a prestigious apartment in Cali. When authorities conducted the arrest, the terrified chess player exclaimed, "Don't shoot, I am a man of peace." With Gilberto Rodríguez arrested, Colombia and the United States achieved their first major victory against the Cali Cartel. Rodríguez faced up to 24 years in prison on drug trafficking and illicit enrichment charges, with several indictments filed against him in various U.S. cities. However, if his lawyers managed to secure all the benefits provided by the Colombian Penal Code for him, he would risk no more than 5 years. The day after his arrest during a street festival in San Antonio Park in downtown Medellín, a bomb exploded, killing 21 people and injuring over 200. An anonymous call reported that the explosion was an act of vengeance for Rodríguez's arrest. No terrorist attack, however, managed to distract Colombian authorities again, who focused their attention on Miguel Rodríguez. The capture of the cunning and always prepared Miguel was aided by his head of security, Jorge Salcedo. Ironically, just a few years earlier, Rodríguez himself had managed to help track down Gotcha. Salcedo, at the cost of incredible effort and mortal risk, provided the DEA with precise information about Miguel's hiding place, as Miguel had nearly figured out who the mole in his organization was. For 4 days, agents monitored the apartment in a prestigious residential complex indicated by Salcedo. Once they were certain Miguel was indeed there, they scheduled the raid for August 6th, literally the following day. All previous attempts to capture Rodríguez had failed. Each time he managed to preempt the agents by a narrow margin, and time was working against them. The operation's success depended on the element of surprise. Rodríguez always had several escape routes, which often allowed him to evade capture. This time, agents caught him just as he was attempting to hide in a compartment behind a 5-door wardrobe for documents built into the wall. He had every comfort there: food, bottled water, an oxygen tank for breathing, a stool, and a copy of the Colombian Penal Code. When he noticed gringos among the crowd after his arrest, he understood everything and seemed to resign himself to his fate, even posing calmly for photographs with the DEA agents. Chepe Santacruz was already dead by this point. He had been arrested shortly before Miguel and incarcerated in La Pacoda prison, from which he managed to escape through a clever ruse. A car carrying supposed investigators arrived for him. They were let through and took Chepe to freedom. Military and intelligence units swept through Cali and Bogotá, but found no indication of his whereabouts. The Colombian government offered a $2 million reward for Chepe's return. What happened next remains somewhat unclear. According to the official version, Santacruz was killed in a shootout with police on August 5, 1996. This was also confirmed by DEA agents. However, post-mortem photographs show signs of torture on Chepe's body. The Santacruz family demanded a second autopsy, but Chepe was buried in the Cali cemetery without one. Today, many sources remain skeptical of the official version, and it is highly probable that Danilo Gonzalez and Don Berna, anticipating the giant's imminent fall, were involved in Santacruz's death, helping to eliminate the rival. After Santacruz's demise, the only Cali godfather remaining at large was Pacho Herrera. On September 1, 1996, after months of negotiations, Pacho arrived at a police base in Cali to surrender to General Serrano. Herrera became an informant, accusing 35 individuals, including some family members, of cartel affiliation. In exchange, Herrera received a sentence of 6 years and 8 months and a fine of $1 million for a drug trafficking-related offense. On November 5, 1998, Pacho was playing soccer in the maximum security area of Palmyra prison when a well-dressed man posing as a lawyer approached him, embraced him warmly, then drew a pistol and shot him 6 times in the head. In this manner, the Cali Cartel was decapitated. However, Miguel and Gilberto lived in La Picota prison more like guests than criminals, thanks to the incurably corrupt Colombian prison system. The brothers used cell phones and presumably a communication network routed through a public phone within the prison to manage their business interests. Family members and lawyers came and went at their leisure, delivering their messages to and from the prison. In 1 week, Gilberto received visits from 123 lawyers. Their cells resembled luxurious apartments more than anything, equipped with cable television, expensive stereo systems, carpeting, and adjacent private bathrooms. They had their own cook and a private bar. Inside prison, Miguel operated a small kiosk called Poor Miguel's Shop, selling shortbread cookies, aspirin, Belgian chocolate, and soft drinks to visitors. For engaging in business activities within the prison walls, Colombian law allowed for a 1/3 sentence reduction. In January of 1997, Gilberto and Miguel were finally convicted for their crimes. Following a plea bargain negotiated by their lawyers, the elder brother received 10.5 years, while the younger received 9 years. The sentences fell far short of the maximum penalty of 24 years the court could have imposed, or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, which they certainly would have received had they been extradited to the United States. However, this was only the first criminal case against the brothers, as 4 others were pending. The following month, Miguel was sentenced to 23 years in prison for a shipment of 180 kilograms of cocaine sent to Tampa in 1989, for which he refused to accept responsibility. In May of 1998, an appellate court judge added 5 years to the sentences for both Gilberto and Miguel. And on November 7, 2002, a Colombian court shocked the nation by ordering the early release of Gilberto Rodríguez, despite strong pressure from President Álvaro Uribe. Incredibly, the chess player had spent less than 6 years in prison for his crimes. Then, 4 months after Gilberto's release from prison, the Colombian government brought new charges against him: his alleged involvement in sending 150 kilograms of cocaine from Colombia to the United States in 1990. Gilberto Rodríguez found himself back in prison. The United States government, for its part, continued its investigations into the Rodríguez Orejuela brothers, with the aim of securing their extradition to the States. It never eased its aggressive pursuit of the Cali Cartel's money and assets. The application of economic sanctions against the cartel's holdings became its punitive tool. The Cali Cartel had invested billions of dollars earned from drug trafficking into companies that appeared legitimate, particularly pharmaceutical ones. The greatest humiliation for Gilberto and Miguel was the confiscation of their creation, the chain of 400 pharmacies, Drogas La Rebaja, across 26 cities in the country, valued at a total of $216 million in 2004. It was this very seizure that broke the backbone of their entire financial organization. And on December 3, 2004, Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela was extradited to the United States of America. In March of 2005, President Uribe finally ordered the extradition of Miguel, and in January of 2006, William Rodríguez Abadia, Miguel's son and the de facto head of the Cali Cartel, surrendered to U.S. agents in Panama after years on the run. Then, a genuine sensation occurred. While his father and uncle languished in the Miami Federal Detention Center, awaiting their September trial, 40-year-old Abadia agreed to testify against them. He also pleaded guilty to what prosecutors termed his participation in a vast cocaine importation conspiracy that existed from 1990 until July 2002, and he was sentenced to nearly 22 years of incarceration in a federal prison. He confessed to helping his father and uncle manage their criminal empire from behind bars after they were imprisoned in 1995, and he agreed to forfeit his stake in the business empire, valued at approximately $300 million. On September 26th, Gilberto and Miguel, so that their family members, included on the so-called Clinton list for the Cali Cartel case, could live peacefully, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to smuggle over 200 kilograms of cocaine into the United States from Colombia via Central America. They also agreed to plead guilty to charges from the Southern District of New York for conspiracy to launder their illicit fortune through their pharmaceutical empire, which included over 400 retail pharmacies throughout Colombia, as well as pharmaceutical companies that manufactured medications. The family members also agreed to forfeit all inheritance from the Rodríguez enterprises in the United States and worldwide, as investigations had established the use of drug trafficking proceeds. In exchange, the family members obtained the right to be removed from the blacklist for crimes committed before December 16, 1997. Immediately following the guilty plea, the judge sentenced 67-year-old Gilberto and 62-year-old Miguel to 30 years in prison on money laundering charges. The sentence was to run concurrently with the 30-year prison term previously issued following the cocaine trafficking charges contained in the indictment from the Southern District of Florida. Gilberto passed away in 2022 from cancer at the age of 83. Miguel is still alive. His release date is July 15, 2028, and he is now 80 years old. William Rodríguez, under the terms of the agreement, served 5 years and was released. In 2014, he authored the book I Am the Son of the Cali Cartel, in which he detailed his life and the reasons he chose to denounce his father and uncle. The defeat of the two major Colombian cartels changed little in the war on drugs, but their arrests served as a wise lesson for other traffickers in Colombia. If you become an organization that is too complex, you become more vulnerable. Today, we observe a radically different type of drug-dealing organization. The enormous corporations that employed thousands of people and generated $7 billion in annual revenue have disappeared. Instead, so-called cartelitos have emerged, operating with the same discretion that characterized the Cali Union, but they no longer rely on a complex organizational structure or modern communication systems. Indeed, nothing is more reliable than a face-to-face meeting without unwanted witnesses. Furthermore, modern Colombian cartels do not sell directly. They hand the merchandise over to the Mexicans, meaning the United States cannot initiate extradition proceedings against them, regardless of where the cocaine ultimately ends up. Extradition remains the most dreaded word among the narcos. At one time, Colombian traffickers were responsible for 80, if not 90%, of the cocaine transported into the United States. Following the liquidation of Cali and Medellín, the Mexican cartels filled most of that vacuum. It is impossible to stop every person and every vehicle crossing the border, at least among the 48 million pedestrians, 90 million vehicles, and 44 million trucks that, according to U.S. Border Patrol estimates, cross it annually. In the endless war on drugs, nothing has changed except the actors involved.